So, I've recently published a video, part 1 to this rant, where I discussed about a Vanity Fair article, but I didn't really go into the Vanity Fair article. So on this video I want to go into that and kind of do a deep dive into what the article is talking about, rather than just picking up points. And we'll go through it from there. This is Galadriel in the water, being all aloof, or whatever she's doing there. So the article starts, Amazon's Lord of the Rings series rises inside the Rings of Power. One shot to rule them all, first to look at a billion-dollar saga set thousands of years before J.R.R. Tolkien's legendary trilogy. Galadriel's world is a raging sea, far from the wise, ethereal elven queen that Cate Blanchett brought to Peter Jackson's acclaimed films. The Galadriel played by Morfydd Clark in Amazon's upcoming series Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, is thousands of years younger, as angry and brash as she is clever, and certain that evil is looming closer than anyone realises. Now, again, in my previous rant, I talked about Galadriel and how the show is trying to perceive her as very young and angry and brash, as it's stated here. But she's gone through the first age. She is one of the Eldar, which was one of the first elves, also known as the High Elves. And she's lived centuries already, and that means that she's gone through a hell of a lot of things that you would do within life. And Tolkien in his later life he got himself attached to how elves would react and how they would be, knowing that they're immortal and can live for thousands and thousands of years. So, to say that she's young, angry and brash is to state that centuries have passed without any kind of development on her behalf. Even though, as stated in the last rant I did, she's gone through the death of family members, she's gone through the death of friends, she's gone through hardships in life, she's found love, and within the second age she'll also, become a mother. And this is kind of weird to say that she's younger and angry and brash, because a person that's gone through a lot already, to say that she's got these base forms of emotion and not, battle through and become wiser for it, is very shallow in what they're depicting here. So let's read forward. For episode 2, her warnings set her adrift, literally and figuratively, until she's struggling for survival on a raft in the storm-swept sundering seas, alongside a mortal castaway named Halbrand. So why is she set adrift in the sundering seas? Okay, so the sundering sea is basically the south and western sea of Middle-earth. And it makes you think, why is she there? Because generally she wouldn't be coming from Valinor. She would already be in Middle-earth. Unless they're changing it where she is coming from Valinor now to, basically the woman that leads the charge against Sauron. Which seems to be very, very far off in what we know from the actual events of the second age. Let's carry on. Their entwined destinies are just two of the stories woven together for a TV series that, if it works, could become a global phenomenon. If it falls short, it could become a cautionary tale for anyone who, to quote J.R.R. Tolkien, delves too greedily and too deep. Now that statement seems to make sense, because and it really kind of goes on the delivery of it. If you look at the TV series, as shown, they are being greedy, and they are going too deep. They're going to the second age, which they don't have rights to do. They are creating new stories and changing stories within the already established lore. So what's stated there is that if it falls short, it's a cautionary tale of delving too greedily and too deep. They've already done that. They've already delved too greedily with the amount of money that they spent on it, and too deep in regards to changing a hell of a lot of the lore to make a show out of it. Amazon's show, which debuts on Prime Video on September the 2nd, which is the day of Tolkien's death, is based not on a Tolkien novel per se, on the vast backstory he laid out in the appendices to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So, what they're saying here is they don't have rights to the whole Legendorium, as I've already stated, but they're using the appendices at the back of Return of the King. This means that they've got about this much information to go on, and they're trying to stretch it out into 5 seasons. As I said here, 5 seasons will likely cost the studio well over $1 billion. So that's a lot for a show that could literally be dead on arrival. Let's carry on. That kind of budget might decimate most other studios, but Tolkien, like space travel, is a personal obsession for Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, who's among the richest people in the world. So they're flexing there, it seems to be. This is a big ticket business venture that will allow him to create the most expensive, elaborate TV series ever made. While Jackson is not connected to the project, his movies, as well as their spiritual successor, Game of Thrones, proved that there's a massive audience for immersive fantasy. Of course, many have tried to capture the same audience, and few have survived or thrived. Now, with what is stated there, is obviously Jeff Bezos is very rich, so therefore he's trying to put loads of money into it because he thinks he can make something like Jackson made, or like what Game of Thrones was. But again, it's very shallow to state that. Jackson's trilogy of Lord of the Rings was great because it used the story of Lord of the Rings and brought it to life. Everything that Peter Jackson wanted to do was get everything from the book and bring it to life. Lord of the Rings was going to be real, and they were going to film it, basically. And again, I said this in my other video, Jackson states that he wanted to do these films for Tolkien. Everything in it will be about, Tolkien's message, and, he'll want to try and make it as close to the books as possible. And he didn't do too bad. He did really well, and it's shown as basically the blueprint for a successful fantasy series. With Game of Thrones, they try and tie that in with the success of Jackson's films, and seeing that, fantasy shows and things like that can, be big winners. But Game of Thrones is far from Lord of the Rings. no one would put them in the same category. It hooked people for a lot of different reasons than people who are fans of Lord of the Rings got hooked to that. And I think, yes, it does, I believe the Lord of the Rings movies did give Game of Thrones a stepping stone, but it didn't, pave it for it to be as successful as it was. But again, deviating from the books and making your own interpretation of things didn't do too well for Game of Thrones, and a lot of fans fell off towards the end of it because it wasn't following the books or the anticipation of the fans from the books. And again, that should be a cautionary tale for people that are deviating from the source material. But to say that there's been other fantasy shows and whatnot that have tried to survive and thrive, there has been. It's just a matter of fact is that there's also been a fall off because they're trying to capture the light. But if there's no intrigue there, sometimes it doesn't catch. So this is Warrior Galadriel, as you can see. And they say, because of Bezos' immense wealth, again flexing, the Rings of Power is actually less of a financial risk than it is a reputational one. Amazon needs to definitely make the case that it can produce giant prestige shows, and with this series, it's courting the additional danger of amending and elaborating on the canon of a beloved storyteller. Right, so this is where a major alarm bells start ticking off, and especially if you're a big fan of Lord of the Rings already. To say that it's not a financial risk, they're just going to pump money into it, and it goes more on the reputation, and then to say that they're amending and elaborating on the canon of a beloved storyteller basically means that what Tolkien did, they're going to ignore and put their own things into it, which then runs a risk. But you're obviously aware of the risk, otherwise you'll be talking about it. So therefore, you've already shot yourself in the foot, and now you're telling everyone that you shot yourself in the foot, and they're not going to the hospital about it. So the showrunners, Patrick McKay and J.D. Payne, are agonisingly aware of the pressure. Their series will juggle 22 stars and multiple storylines, from deep within the dwarf mines of the Misty Mountains to the high politics of the Elven Kingdom of Lindon and the humans' powerful Atlantis-like island, Numenor. All this will centre eventually around the incident that gives the trilogy its name, the Forging of the Rings, says McKay. Rings for the elves, rings for the dwarves, rings for men, and then the One Rings Sauron used to deceive them all. It's the story of the creation of all those powers, where they came from, and what they did to each of those races. The driving question behind the production, he adds, was this: can we come up with a novel Tolkien never wrote, and do it as a mega event series that could only happen now? Again, reading this as a fan, and reading the narcissism that is within what they're stating here. Yeah, they're going to talk about, all the different people. And again, it states, juggle 22 stars and multiple storylines. Now, again, alarm bells. When you're making a series that's as beloved as Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's work, it's not juggling. When I think about writing and looking into stories and things like that, if I've got established characters that are interesting and well developed, I'm excited to use them. I'm excited to explore where the story is going to go with them and use them to create an amazing story. But to say that they're juggling 22 stars and multiple storylines it's kind of a threat. You know, they're juggling, they're trying to do a lot of things in one go. Well, they're meant to, they're making a series. They're meant to be excited about this. They're meant to be not juggling, but telling the story of multiple characters. And wanting to, in a way. And then this last line that is added by McKay. Can we come up with a novel Tolkien never wrote and do it as the mega event series that could only happen now? Again, the narcissism from a fan reading this and the ignorance in it as well. It kind of doesn't give you faith in the showrunners. Can we come up with a novel Tolkien never wrote? Well then, why do we want to watch it? You can't stamp Lord of the Rings or the Rings of Power onto the series and then write a completely different story and say that it's your own doing. It's got nothing to do with Tolkien. Then no one wants it. People want Tolkien's work. And to say that, can it be the mega event series that could only happen now? Right, so you're saying that you have zero faith in Tolkien's work, so that you have to change it, and in doing so, you're wanting to make it for a modern audience so that it gains interest. I'll tell you what, why don't you not try and write your own stuff and slap Lord of the Rings on it, and instead just make stories within Tolkien's world that, you know, works with the established lore. And that will make you the mega event series that could only happen now. Because people are already interested in Tolkien's work. He is the grandfather of fantasy. Without it, you wouldn't have any of these other fantasies that are breaking records. So to go back and say that, let's say you want to make a second age Lord of the Rings, there is a multitude of stories that you could use to make an amazing series. But you don't want to do that. You want to make your own series with your own stuff in it. And to say that people are that naive, they won't like it if it's not made for a modern audience or it's not made in a certain way. That's ludicrous. Galadriel's survival at sea is not just a crucial story point at the start of the series. The showrunners remember it as a pivotal moment on set in New Zealand back in March 2020. Morford was a few days into being Galadriel, which is probably terrifying, says McKay. She's in water, there's a lot of visual effects, there's music and light. But despite the momentous scene in front of them, the show's crew were glued to their phones. Within 45 minutes, word spread that in nearby Australia, Tom Hanks had contracted COVID. The NBA had cancelled its season and the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic. We're all just going, oh my god, what are we going to do? We're going to have to shut everything down, says McKay. The panic metastasized, setting off other anxieties, big and small. It was terrifying. Oh my god, is anyone going to understand what we're trying to do here? Is this way too ambitious? We have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. So, in this section, McKay continues and kind of goes into the fact COVID happened. But the annoying thing is that they're talking about a scene for Galadriel, and no one's paying attention. This is meant to be a mega blockbuster. This is meant to be an amazing TV show that they're creating here, and no one's even interested into doing the work. The show's crew were glued to their phones within 45 minutes. Word had spread. Now, I'm just theorising here, but on the set of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I doubt anybody, and it is back in the early 2000s, well before that, it's in the 90s, and there weren't such things as mobile phones and things like that. But I think the main focus of everyone on set and whatnot, and if you go into the appendices of the DVDs to kind of show how much people was at work with this trilogy, it kind of consumed their life. There was nothing really getting in the way of the production. The production was getting in the way of other things, maybe. And that's why, like, family members would be in New Zealand with them and things like that. Because this trilogy was going to take over their lives for a few years. With this, it seems like it hasn't. They're not in the moment. They're not really fussed about the scene that they're taking. That with modern media and what they have in regards to phones and whatnot, they were side-saddled with this COVID pandemic. And it's funny how he talks about it a little bit and then goes into COVID, and it's kind of like washed the whole spectacle of that scene that he's trying to talk about there. And again, why is Galadriel near the sea? Why is she fighting for survival? Where's her husband? All these questions are just ringing alarm bells, and it's very, very, very concerning. But also very, very concerning that the scene's so uninteresting that none of the crew give the crap and start going on their phones. Okay. We'll carry on. Can you imagine going back to such a beloved world and facing the high bar of the Peter Jackson movies? We were, all the time, very aware of their massive expectations and failing at it. Let's see what he's saying here. But one by one, the crew put down their phones. Everyone was crowding around the monitor as we're doing this close-up where Galadriel's face fills the screen, and she cries, and she decides, I have to fight, says McKay. As soon as the scene ended, the soundstage erupted in cheers. It's a perfect example of how Tolkien and Middle-earth have a way of finding you, even in the darkest and most uncertain moments, says Penn. So it's McKay saying one thing and then Penn saying another. I want to see what that has to do and how does that correlate. So you have a good actress with Morphy Clark saying a line, and that seems, and as soon as the scene ended, so they had wrapped on the scene and they had cheered. Well, yes, they had wrapped on a scene, but again, what does it, context does it have to make to do with talking to Middle-earth and finding you even in the darkest and most uncertain moments? What, because you all had a text about COVID? What are you talking about? Again, just blowing things up into something that makes absolute no sense. Whatever other chaos might befall them, they finally felt that they were on the right path. The first 3 episodes, which Vanity Fair have seen, suggests they were. The show is a lavish, compelling mix of palace intrigue, magic, warfare and mythology. And there are enough mysteries to power 1,000 podcasts. Some characters will be familiar, and they will be in the initial attraction as viewers watch their legendary fates unfurl. But the entirely new faces may ultimately become even more involving, since their destinies are literally unwritten. Again, so you're giving us some characters, which, well done. It's kind of a bit weird if you're not going to give us Galadriel or anyone else that we know was in the Second Age. But again, the new characters, are we really going to be that invested? Seeing as we don't want to see that, we want to see the work that Tolkien's done brought to reality first. It seems like these new faces and these new people will just be a kind of filler. Would they not? Because that's what it seems to be initially. So Vanity Fair have seen the first 3 episodes of this, and they say it's lavish, compelling mix of palace intrigue, magic, warfare and mythology. Okay, so it seems like a lot of things is being crushed into these 3 episodes. Because again, Second Age, nothing much happens until like the later half of the Second Age, when you have people, rallying against Sauron. Let's carry on. So these are the original characters. Previously, this part of the story was most famous as Ruins. After the success of his 1937 children's story, The Hobbit, Tolkien turned his attention back to a volume of Middle-earth history, which his publishers rejected. A more complete version was published posthumously as The Silmarillion. So as the Second World War of his lifetime raged around him, Tolkien crafted an adventure about beings from very different societies, putting aside their differences to stamp out an overpowering evil. This, of course, was the Lord of the Rings. In that story, an unlikely fellowship ventures into Mordor to destroy Sauron's ring. Along the way, Tolkien wanted the characters to pass through a scarred landscape, full of the remains of the many civilizations and battles that had come before. Their journey, after all, was not about confronting a new danger, but finally eradicating an ancient one, a scourge of malevolence that had tormented the land for eons. Tolkien dreamed up whole kingdoms, then collapsed them for background. Yes, so you have read. Very good. The effect worked almost too well. After the publication of The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers in July, November 1954, respectively, readers became obsessive. Most people want more, better maps. Tolkien wrote to his friend in 1956, "Musicians want tunes and musical notations. Archaeologists inquire about ceramics, metallurgy, tools and architecture. Historians require more details about the social and political structure. To give them everything," Tolkien informed his publisher, "would require a book at least the size of Volume 1. Instead, borrowing from his rejected Silmarillion, he squeezed thousands of years of history into about 150 pages of postscript, which became known as the appendices. These timelines, genealogies, and notes on language and culture became so important to Tolkien that he even stalled the publication of the final book, The Return of the King, to complete them. They played a major part in producing the total effect, Tolkien explained to a foreign publisher in 1961, producing the compelling sense of historical reality. After Tolkien's death, his son Christopher took the reins of the estate and was famously protective. if not intransigent, about adaptations of his father's work, fearing commercialisation at every turn. Christopher really disliked Lord of the Onion Rings and the glorification of violence for its own sake. Says Tolkien scholar and Wheaton College professor Michael Drought. He was born in 1924, and so the big special effects movie franchise thing was just not something he cared about. If his father hadn't sold all of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit rights to pay the inheritance taxes, I don't think Christopher would have sold them. Over the years, Christopher Tolkien left lucrative bids for other Middle-earth material on the table, but in 2017, as he was preparing to retire, the Tolkiens held a surprising auction. They were selling the rights to the appendices that outlined what the author had referred to as the Second Age of Middle-earth, along with any references to that time period in Lord of the Rings itself. If you're not up to date on your ages, the second one is seemingly a time of peace for Middle-earth. After an era of horror and conflict, the wicked god Morgoth had been defeated, and his apprentice Sauron has vanished. As the series begins, Galadriel is hunting down the last remnants of their collaborators, who claim the life of her brother. The Third Age and the adventures of Frodo, Sam and the Fellowship await some thousand of years in the future. Okay, so that was a brief history of what Tolkien did and what the appendices are at the end of Return of the King. Now, this isn't the full story. He wanted to make the Silmarillion, but it was rejected because it's too big, and it is a big story. I haven't even read it all, but his son Christopher did, and even though he was protective of his father's work, as you would be, he was still publishing books that his father had outlined. And so he was creating the world that his father left behind. And that goes to show that there is more to what was written. And Christopher Tolkien goes into this extensively, that the Silmarillion is in two parts, whereas everything that he rewrote for the appendices have some discrepancies with the Silmarillion. But the Silmarillion was published anyway to have a complete series within it. Now, this is where it gets convoluted, because with the appendices, it does outline a lot of the stuff that's needed to build the background of the Lord of the Rings, and kind of creates an interest for the world before Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. But Silmarillion kind of shows that in publication form. It shows that, in book form. So you can read all about the First Age and the Second Age within that story. But Amazon didn't buy that. They bought The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings and the appendices, and they're using the appendices to create this story. Now, as I said, they go into what's happened within the First Age and, what the Second Age is about. But it also states that Galadriel is hunting down the last remnants of their collaborators. Now, why Galadriel is doing that kind of makes, again, a fan concerned. Where are all the other people that were still alive within the Second Age that are more inclined to, fight back the remnants of Morgoth? Not only that, it kind of goes into the matter of fact is that there's some sort of revenge plot. Not only in the first stage was her brother killed, but her uncles and her cousins and friends were killed. Loads of people, loads of elves, loads of men, loads of dwarves were killed within the first stage. And the land that most of the conflicts were set in was washed over by the sea. But again, she is a married woman, and she is going to have a daughter within the second age. So if it's a time of peace, she will be living within that peace too. And to state that she's out there, cleaning up orcs and whatnot, is kind of going against the story that she will be leading with Celeborn and her daughter Celebrian. And again, that doesn't sit well with people that know that's what happens. The starting price for the Tolkien Estates auction was a gobsmacking $200 million, which would have been a non-starter if not for the industry's obsession with finding the next Game of Thrones. Again, to state that you're trying to copy off something that was successful for its own merits is very silly. If you're a confident writer and you're confident with what you're buying or what you're getting the rights to, you're not trying to get the next Game of Thrones. You're trying to make the next Lord of the Rings. Right? So again, alarm bells. Why are you trying to make Game of Thrones again? We've seen that. We don't want that anymore. That's not what Lord of the Rings or Tolkien's work is about. It's nothing to do with Game of Thrones and has no relevance to that space. And money wasn't the only daunting factor. A handful of ageless characters, like the elves Galadriel and Elrond, could appear in the new series as their younger selves. But the studio making it would have to forge fan favourite hobbits and wizards, who weren't major players in the Second Age. The Tolkien estate also wanted input into the direction of the series. Again, alarm bells. This is just massive alarm bells for fans. The Second Age doesn't state anything about hobbits, and the wizards don't come about until the Third Age to kind of oversee Middle-earth after Sauron's defeat. The only wizard that would be alive would be Sauron. So stating that they're going to, again, create elves like Galadriel and Elrond, but they're younger selves, that kind of makes sense, but at the same time, they're ageless. So a lot of concerns for me in the beginning was, well, Galadriel and Elrond needs to be Hugo Weaving and Cate Blanchett, because that's who they are within adulthood, and elves are immortal, so therefore they would stay that way within their adulthood. But the studio making it would have to forego a fan favourite hobbits and wizards, who weren't a major player in the Second Age. But that's what they're putting in there. They're putting in hobbits. They're probably putting in wizards. Again, not creating a story that's lore friendly in any way, shape or form, and goes against the script rather than with it. And again, as a fan, that rings alarm bells that I'm not going to like the show, because you're just shoving things in there to go, oh look, hobbits, oh look, wizards, oh look, Galadriel, Elrond's here. Stop it. Just make a good story. You are capable of making a good story if you have good writers making the good story. Let's carry on. This kind of budget could decimate other studios, but Tolkien... Alright, we just read that. The potential upside, though, was a must-see show with a built-in audience that could virtually guarantee survival in the great global streaming war. HBO and Netflix were among the bidders, but Bezos' Amazon team won the rights for $250 million. He is personally a huge fan of Tolkien and incredibly passionate about all of it, and very well versed, says Jennifer Salke, the head of Amazon Studios. His desire to be ambitious and for us to be ambitious with our content has always been clear for the moment I got here. This fit perfectly with that big ambition to take on something that would require the whole company working together to execute. So, this first bit, again, the potential upside though was a must-see show with a built-in audience that could virtually guarantee survival in the great global streaming war. Okay, so again, it's a marketing ploy, obviously. And again, yes, that's the ambition. Ambition is, to make lots of money from Talking to Work, obviously. Let's carry on. Amazon won't confirm the show's budget, but on top of the money for the rights, the government of New Zealand has placed production expenditures of $462 million for the first season alone. That figure includes building infrastructure that will be used in later seasons, and it's been offset by a $108 million tax rebate. By contrast, Amazon's recent fantasy series, The Wheel of Time, reportedly cost $80 million a season. Once you factor in the eventual global marketing campaign and the cost of the subsequent seasons, there's no question that the Rings of Power will eventually speed far beyond the $1 billion mark. Okay, The Wheel of Time, I have nothing to talk about, because I haven't watched it and I don't know what it's about. But I've heard that that's been hard as well. So there's that, if you're going to use that as an example. So let's carry on. Just as Tolkien entrusted his quest to Frodo Baggins and Samwise Gamgee, Amazon chose two unlikely newcomers, McKay Payne, our high school friends from Northern Virginia who have been writing in Hollywood together for 13 years. The Rings of Power is their first credited IMDb listing. So they've been in Hollywood for 13 years. Writing in Hollywood for 13 years. And this is the only credit they're getting. Well, that's not a very good projection when it comes to writing, that you haven't got credit for the work that you've been doing for 13 years, but that they've picked you out to do this, and this is the only credit you've got. Okay. They know it's astounding to them too. We've worked on so many projects with so many awesome and exciting people that never get made or worked on things that did get made and we didn't get credit. Okay, so you made loads of flops, basically. Says McKay. We were a little bit of a dark horse, and Amazon talked to absolutely everybody. Whoever had any idea for Lord of the Rings, that's Payne. We were passionate about the material and had a take that matched Amazon's appetites and ambition. He also apparently had a significant champion in J.J. Abrams, who knew them from their writing on Star Trek movie, and reportedly sang their praises. The Star Trek movie that they wrote was the flop, the last one, that didn't do so well like the first one, the second one. And J.J. Abrams has gone down in infamy as not a very good director. Anyway, pitching 50 hours of television to Amazon executives, and ultimately to the Tolkien family as well, was arduous, but nothing compared to writing, producing and bringing the show to life. We felt like hobbits, Payne says. We felt like two very small people in a very big world who had just been entrusted with something that meant so much to so many different people. The showrunners found themselves quoting Frodo's famous line from the end of the Fellowship of the Ring. Patrick and I will often look at each other in challenging moments of the show and say, "I'm glad you're with me, Sam." "He's Sam," McKay adds. "Just kidding, I'm Sam." So you've got each other's support, very good. A project of this size would never be pulled off alone. Amazon executives, still relatively new to original content, assembled an experienced support team. Game of Thrones co-executive producer Brian Cogman stepped in as an advisor to help McKay and Payne get the project off the ground, and veteran filmmaker J.A. Bayona, classic world Fallen Kingdom, established the tone of the series by directing the first 2 episodes. Bayona was attracted not just by the duo's script, but by their willingness to accept advice. "From the very beginning, I trusted these guys," Bayona says. "I knew they were going through. I knew what they were going through, and they knew what I was going through also. Because can you imagine going back to such a beloved world and facing the high bar Peter Jackson's movies? We were all the time very aware of the massive expectations." Okay. A fellowship was formed. Okay. Until now, Amazon has said virtually nothing about its show. Secrecy has irked some in the fandom. Accustomed as they were to the closest relationship and steady flow of behind-the-scenes information from Jackson and New Line Studios, can a 66-year-old text really be spoiled? Given that many are unfamiliar with the appendices, the answer is actually yes. We believe all of that work and all of that security and all of that protection will actually be the benefit of our customers, says Vernon Sanders, head of US Global Television for Amazon. For her part, Selke thinks the secrecy and the intense fan curiosity it generates is healthy for the show. Anybody who's scrutinizing or chasing flyers or trying to peek in any crack they can to get details or even speculating, that's all about fan engagement and passion. So we view it as such, she says. The speculation is welcome. Radio silence has been the norm with Marvel, DC, Star Wars, and latter season Game of Thrones. But Amazon's clandestine tactics reached new levels. Even the cast members were hired without being told which part they would play. Okay, so with this they're talking about the secrecy of the show. And again, we don't know much about it. We know more about it, but not as much as we'd like. But again, the alarm bells here are the secrecy with Marvel, DC, Star Wars, and the later season of Game of Thrones. Because obviously the later season of Game of Thrones goes off book, and we're not as good as the other seasons, and it's a bad example to use. Star Wars, the sequels will never be as good as what we got with George Lucas's work. And we understand Marvel and DC's were always like that, but we generally got an outline of where they would be going. So let's carry on. There was one leak in 2019 that, however innocuous, worried some of those watching from afar. The show's resident Tolkien scholar, a widely respected academic named Tom Shippey, gave an apparently unsanctioned interview to a German fan site that July. Opening... is that a word? Opening on what the show could and could not explore. Not long after that, Shippey was no longer involved with the series. Okay, again, this is something that I want to talk about. So, Tom Shippey is a respected and well-renowned Tolkien scholar, as it were. He studied Tolkien's work, and, is a professor of literature and things like that. And he was obviously hired to help the Amazon series. Yes, and he did do an interview for a German fan site, July 2019. But to then cast him off the series, to basically say, you're no longer involved within it, is a big slap in the face for people that see Tom Shippey as a very respected Tolkien scholar and someone who they put on high esteem when it comes to Tolkien's world. So again, as this is a slap in the face to the fans in many cases. But let's carry on reading. Both he and the showrunners declined to say what exactly happened, but the obvious assumption was made by fans. Seems like the NDA is basically, if you tell anyone, we can put you through a wood chipper, says Trout, the Tolkien professor. Amazon no longer shares the names of its scholars. So, basically, this person's confessing. It's not really the fans. This is an assumption from a fan, but this is a direct quote from Drought, who they've hired as well, saying that NDA is basically, if you tell anyone, we can put you through the wood chipper. Basically saying that you've told people, that means you're out. Again, when someone as respected as Tom Shippey, you would, again, I understand where they're coming from with the NDAs, but also that they have to provide some discretion in regards to what's being said and why it's bad and why you would disconnect from someone who is a well-devoured Tolkien professor compared to Drought, who we don't know that much of, and anyone else that may be involved in the show. It kind of puts fans on the back burner and kind of goes, well, if they're that scrupulous with people that are well respected, how scrupulous are they going to be with the fandom and the work that they've been given? Let's carry on. The Rings of Power has lost a few upper players along the way, including actors Will Poulter and Tom Budge. Coupled with the departures of Shippey, production designer Rick Heinrichs, and one of the executives who helped negotiate the Tolkien deal in the first place. Amazon head of genre Sharon T. Yaguardo, whatever, if I butchered that. Those losses sparked concern that the production was chaotic early on, but fans of the movies will remember that Stuart Townsend was replaced by Viggo Mortensen, even after he began swinging a sword in New Zealand. On any long trip, the executives and showrunners insist it is inevitable that some don't complete the journey. Right, so to say this, again, everything seems to be reaching here. So a lot of people have been hemorrhaged from the project. And obviously that shows that there's been a very hectic production. To then state that in the movie, so then you're trying to bring a comparison, that Stuart Townsend was replaced by Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn. That wasn't chaotic. That was a design choice they decided to go with because they wanted Aragorn to be much older and Stuart Townsend was just too young for the role. And that was the only real significant departures that we had within the trilogy. Everything seemed to go swimmingly. So it was that's a bit of a reach to say that you have all these people going, and the comparison is one person. As lifelong genre fans, Payne and McKay understand the anxiety some feel about the show. We know what it's like to be anticipating something and to be terrified that it won't be what you hope, says McKay. We've been those guys many times over. The duo can officially settle some concerns. After news broke that Amazon had hired an intimacy coordinator for its New Zealand set, some fans feared that the production might have lost sight of what makes Tolkien Tolkien. My worry would be if it becomes a Game of Thrones in the Second Age, says Dimitra Feeney, a Tolkien scholar and lecturer at the University of Glasgow. Everyone's a Tolkien scholar now. That wouldn't be what one would associate with Tolkien's vision. It would also be derivative. So will there be Westerosi levels of violence and sex in Amazon's Middle-earth? In short, no. McKay says, the goal was to make a show for everyone, kids who are 11, 12 and 13, even though sometimes they might have to pull the blanket over their eyes if it's a little too scary. We talked about the tone in Tolkien's books. This is material that is sometimes scary, sometimes very intense, sometimes quite political, sometimes quite sophisticated. It's also heartwarming and life-affirming and optimistic. It's about friendship, and it's about brotherhood and underdogs overcoming great darkness. That's not what the Second Age is about. And again, in short, no. What about in length? Whatever, they don't want to talk about it all. Another concern is the series going to put hobbits in the Second Age? In short, so to speak, yes and no. One of the very specific things the text says is that hobbits never did anything historic or noteworthy before the Third Age, says McKay. But really, does it feel like Middle-earth if you don't have hobbits or something like hobbits in it? Yes. Because that's what people are interested in. First Age and Second Age don't have to have hobbits in it to make it interesting. It's up to your writers, up to you as writers, to make it interesting. Just like Tolkien did with the Silmarillion and the works that don't involve hobbits. The hobbit ancestors in this era are called Harfoots, which is only one genus hobbit. They may not live in the Shire, but they are satisfyingly hobbit adjacent. So the hobbits then. We talk about. McKay and Payne have constructed a pastoral Harfoot society that thrives on secrecy and evading detection, so that they can play out a kind of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern dead story in the margins of the bigger quests. Two lovable, curious Harfoots, played by Megan Richards and Michaela Kavanagh, encounter a mysterious lost man whose origin promises to be one of the show's most enticing enigmas. So, what we get from this text is they are shoehorning hobbits into the show because they think that it wouldn't be Middle-earth without them, which is disregarding why fans like Middle-earth. It's for the world building that Tolkien built. Hobbits can be in it, but why make them a focus? This last bit that they talk about, they go into how the hobbits are. And that two lovable, curious Harfoots come across a mysterious man whose origin promises to be one of the show's most enticing enigmas. So what they're trying to say here is this man is going to be Sauron. Am I right? Sauron or Gandalf? Gandalf shouldn't be there. And Sauron makes sense because he is the Lord of the Rings after all. So you're kind of giving the plot there away, even though apparently you're not meant to. But I've already, kind of got that from what you're telling me there. Amazon's series will also broaden the notion of who shares the world of Middle-earth. One original storyline centres on a sylvan elf named Arondir, played by Ismael Cruz Cordova, who was the first person of colour to play an elf on screen in the Tolkien project. Again, this is where it starts. So, broaden the notion of who shares the world of Middle-earth. And they've gone with an elf. No elves share the world of Middle-earth. But why have you gone with the first person of colour to play an elf on screen in a Tolkien project? Why is that an epitaph that you have to fill? This is the thing that people come up with, that, what you're saying is innately racist. But it's not. There is many characters that you could put in there to establish why they're in there. A person of colour is in there. Why change the colour scheme of an elf just so that you have that epitaph? It's silly. But it carries on. He is involved in a forbidden relationship with Bronwyn, a human village healer played by Nazanin Banayordi, a British actor of Iranian heritage. Again, a forbidden relationship. This is the Second Age. We've already seen the unity of Ben Lúthien. And not to mention their ancestors going down to Elrond, who's half Helven. His mother and father, again, Elven and human. So why is this forbidden? It shouldn't be forbidden. You're allowed to be in a relationship with a human. That's not forbidden. But it describes that she's British actor of Iranian heritage. Why do we need to know these circumstances? Why do we need to know that she's a British actor? Why do we need to know that she's of Iranian heritage? What has this got to do with the grand scheme of Middle-earth? But again, it carries on. Elsewhere, a Brit of Jamaican descent, Sir Lenny Henry, plays a half-foot elder, and Sophia Nomvet has a scene-stealing role as the dwarven princess named Disa, the latter being the first black woman to play the dwarf in a Lord of the Rings movie, as well as the first female dwarf. So, again, they go into the specifics that Lenny Henry is a British person of Jamaican descent. What's that got to do with Lord of the Rings? He plays a hobbit elder. And then Sophia Nomvet is a dwarven princess named Disa. So they've taken Dis and made a new character called Disa for some reason. And they do a mistake here because they say that the latter being the first black woman to play a dwarf in a Lord of the Rings movie, and she's not in a movie, she's in a TV series. And yes, it makes no physical sense for her to be that. Again, you're just building that as an epitaph. The first black dwarf and the first female dwarf, which isn't true, because in the Hobbit trilogy we see plenty of female dwarves, and we know of female dwarves. It felt only natural to to us that an adaptation of Tolkien's work would reflect what the world actually looks like, says Lindsay Weber, executive producer of the series. So, what you're saying is a timeless story that was created by someone over 60 years ago has to reflect what the world looks like now, when it's meant to be escapism, like I said in the previous rant. This is a fantasy story. It shouldn't be cemented in any realism. There shouldn't be any actual world context within this series. Tolkien is for everyone. No one is debating that. The thing is that you are literally stating that Tolkien isn't for everyone, so we're trying to make it so it is. You're the only one that's been a hypocrite. Tolkien is for everyone. There is people of different colours, of different walk of life, of different sexualities, of different genders. They love Tolkien's work the way it is, the way Tolkien wrote it, and the way we read it. Tolkien is for everyone, so why are you adapting to reflect what the world actually looks like? You're contradicting yourself with them two statements. His story is about his fictional races doing their best work when they leave the isolation of their own cultures and come together. What's that got to do with anything? And it's not the same as reality. It's completely different. Okay. Let's go on. When Amazon released photos of its multicultural cast, again, the literal signposting is just atrocious. Even without character names or plot details, the studio endured a reflexive attack from trolls, the anonymous online kind. Obviously, there was going to be push and backlash, says Tolkien scholar Marina Rios Maldonado, who is not affiliated with the Rings of Power. But the question is, from whom? Who are these people that feel so threatened or disgusted by the idea an elf is black or Latino or Asian? Again, you're creating the problem and then asking you why there is one. You knew you was going to get backlash for putting these characters in certain roles because you wanted the epitaph, and then got upset that people are upset that you are virtue signalling this annotation. No one's disgusted by someone who's black or Latino or Asian. They're just kind of put off by, you've gone, we need an elf to be black or Latino or Asian. When in the world of Lord of the Rings, black, Latino or Asian, you could use so many other races. You could talk about Herodrims. You could talk about people from Rune. You could talk about what's the other one? Easterlings. But you haven't. You've shoehorned a person of colour to play an elf. It's like you don't even care if he's really good at acting. You just need him to be there to be your tokenization. And that's where your argument falls apart. You knew what you was doing when you did that. It's like you did it on purpose. And that's why you're getting backlash. But anyway, digress. Even hardcore fans who regard Tolkien's work as sacrosanct will recognise his message of unity. Staying true to that is as important as realising his vision of places and characters from this little known era in his fiction. Right, so what they're saying in this little statement is they want to put through a message of unity with their characters, with what they're doing, to represent, the modern world. But that's not what Tolkien did. He's not talking about, he wasn't looking into the meta of how men, elves and dwarves unite. He's just looking into the story context that there is 3 people in Middle-earth, and then there's a tyrant that wants to control them, so they have to band together. It has no relevance to reality. But you're trying to sway that the message of unity can be put forward to meaning, unity of colour, unity of people within the modern world. Anyway, we will finally see the full glory of Castle Doom, the cavernous necropolis carved into the Misty Mountains, where in Jackson's The Fellowship of the Ring, Gandalf famously bellowed at the Balrog, "You shall not pass." The show will explore that kingdom when it was still full of light, food and music. It will also bring the elven smith, Celebrimbor, so he is in it, to life, as his skill with metals and magic lead to the forging of the rings, and a canny young elven architect and politician named Elrond will rise to prominence in the mystical capital of Lindon. Another storyline will follow a sailor named Isildur, years before he becomes a warrior and cuts the soul-corrupting ring off Sauron's hand, then falls victim to his powers himself. Okay, so this is talking about the main parts of the Second Age. So we have Celebrimbor, and kind of states Celebrimbor as what he was in the Second Age. Talks about Elrond, but Elrond seems a bit different here. He's an architect and a politician. Was he really an architect and a politician under the tutelage of Gil-galad? Because I don't think he was. More like his squire, and someone who would follow the High King of the Elves. But you don't talk about Gil-galad. And then again you talk about Isildur. Now, again, the Second Age, and they've talked about this already, and they'll probably talk about it in this article. They're condensing it. So Isildur, which shouldn't be in it until later seasons, is going to be shoehorned into it, isn't he? And again, it's not just about Isildur, it's about his father, it's about his brother, it's about the whole heritage of the kings. And exploring that would be interesting, but all you're stating is that Isildur is there, and that he's a sailor. He's not a sailor, he's a prince. Again, what faith are you giving fans when you're stating that Isildur, who we know is a prince, son of the king, Elendil the Tall, who wielded Narsil, is a sailor, and nothing about his heritage is stated here. The only thing that we know is that Galadriel's top dog. There's a princess, the dwarf woman. Everything else seems to be like they are in here. Elrond isn't even seen as a squire of the king of elves. What are they trying to push? That's what kind of rings alarm bells here, like a sailor named Isildur, an architect and politician named Elrond. No. No. Speaking of Sauron, the villain's presence is a major factor throughout the Second Age, culminating in his resurrection as a tyrant. As the show begins, there are only hints of the danger to come. Some see them clearly, others don't necessarily want to. Beorn drew from his memories growing up in Spain, a country still recovering from a civil war decades before he was born. We had a dictatorship for 40 years, so you notice the repercussions of war and the shadow of the past, he says. Noting that shadow of the past is in fact the title of the first episode. I think this is all about the repercussions of war. There is an idea that feels very faithful to Tolkien, which is intuition. Galadriel has an intuition that things are not fixed and there is still something lurking. Again, taking modern events and putting it into a fantasy element means that you don't get the context of escapism, and again are flooding it into realism. In all intensive purposes, everything that was evil has been drowned in the First Age. Galadriel shouldn't have an intuition that nothing is fixed, because she knows that all the really, really bad things have been destroyed. Yes, there may be remnants, but she won't be after them. Other people will. She'll be settling down with Celeborn and having her daughter. In the novels, the aforementioned things take place over thousands of years, but Payne and McKay have compressed events into a single point in time. It is their biggest deviation from the text, and they know it's a big swing. We talked to the Tolkien estate, says Payne. If you are true to the exact letter of the law, you are going to be telling a story in which your human characters are dying off every season, because you're jumping 200 years in time. And then you're not meeting really big, important canon characters until season 4. Look, there might be some fans who want us to do a documentary of Middle-earth, but we're going to tell one story that unites all these things. Yes, we do. Because you can easily do that. And at writing point, you can show the evolution of the story and develop these characters, and even have them die off and show mortality of humans. That is one of the big things within this world that's being tackled. The elves don't age, but the humans do, and there's mortality there. There's a story in the First Age about Finrod, Galadriel's brother, who meets a mortal woman who's in love with Finrod's brother. But obviously she grows old whilst, I forgot his name, doesn't. And this sadness from Finrod and his brother about obviously that humans, don't survive, they don't have immortality. But the woman is okay and content with that with her mortality, and there's that sort of story of battling between immortality and mortality and what it means from both sides of the spectrum. And that would have been great to see within a series tackling that and tackling the lineage of men and dwarves and whatnot, and where it's going to go within the story, but to condense it down just so you can tell a story, means that you have zero faith and you're trying to ship this out as fast as you can to make as much money as you can and bail. That's what I see anyway. The showrunners clearly have great respect for Tolkien, but you can't make a 50-hour adaptation without taking creative risks. We think the work will eventually speak for itself, Ben says when we asked if fan concern and speculation ever unnerves him. Before an orchestra starts, audience will talk to each other. Then as soon as the music begins, they're in and you're listening to that music. What's that got to do with the TV series? But okay. But you can't make a 50-hour adaptation without taking creative risks. Then make a 100-hour adaptation. Make a 200-hour adaptation. Because people like Lord of the Rings, they will stay for it. Just like video games. People have played video games for thousands of hours because they are invested in the story, they're invested in the world, and whatnot. If you're saying you can't do this with a series, then you shouldn't be making the series. But again, give it the benefit of the doubt. I will watch the first episode and see how it goes from there and give my review on it. But from what this article is saying, and from what we've seen, and the superfan reactions that it was trying to push as well, and what the fans are kind of saying, a lot of the fans are saying, is that they don't want this. They want Tolkien's work. They don't want a virtue signal meta story of fantasy with Tolkien's name stamped on it. And that's where it really falls, with the series. But yeah, we'll look into it, we'll see what it's all about. Thanks for paying attention to this article with me, and catch you on the next one.